You're in Ireland, right, Keith?
Yeah.
How?
I don't actually know that well what are your guys' politics. Like you're kind of like
Yeah, I think that.
disaffected Bernie bros.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a good summation of it. Yeah, we met through like Bernie Twitter recommendations and stuff. But we different tendencies, I'd
So I'm at Slavoid T.
All right, this is shit spouter 37.
This is black.com pilled.
This is the Fed Post.
the three of us sort of have like different tendencies. I'd say. I guess Slav is probably more like right leaning, like on social issues, like more conservative. COH is like he's read a lot of Marx, so he's kind of got a Marx Leninist kind of bent. But and me, I'd say is just more like just economic populism, like non-denominational. You know what I mean? Like I don't really I'm very like averse to ideology specifically, but yeah, I think we're sort of more aligned on that. At least we don't really care too much about like labels. Really, we talk to anybody.
And I've been kind of just enjoying just kind of a spread of different, I don't want to sound like IDW or something, but like a spread of different people, you know, to just have on and be like, look, Undeal.
Yeah, exactly. And to not make like I try not to make too much assumption before I hear it, because sometimes I don't have any idea. But like, yeah, for you, for instance, like I'm not, how would you describe it? Because I don't have like a strong sense of where you fall.
I guess I'm like a right socialist, maybe, or I mean, I would use the term nationalist, but I don't really. It's kind of identified with like it kind of gets tied up with like romantic nationalism and revanchism and stuff. So I don't know. I'm kind of going in a different direction.
But you'd say you're like informed by Marx to some degree.
Well, I've never been a Marxist. I was a leftist for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was never usually influenced by Marx. It's actually only the last couple of years I really started looking at Marxism.
Oh, nice.
But mostly secondary stuff. Like I like David Harvey, The Economist.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through a few of his books.
What were you gonna say, Suez?
I was just going to ask kind of what your, you said you used to be a leftist or whatever. As much as we tried to not really claim titles and stuff, I know a couple of us had a similar trajectory of quote unquote used to being a leftist. But I was just wondering kind of what that looked like for you, like your trajectory from there to here.
Well, it was a very long phase. I mean, it was like when I first got interested in politics was when there was the big economic crash in 08, 09, because Ireland got hit kind of the worst of that in Europe. Like we ended up taking on, I forget the statistic, but it was like close to 80% of like the European banking debt was taken on by the Irish state. So yeah, like that was kind of a chaotic time in Ireland because the economy just collapsed overnight. We went from like the biggest economy in Europe to like this massive budget deficit, and the IMF and the ECB and the World Bank were in to bail out the government, and like there was a swell of like populism, and like the political party that had basically been the biggest party in the country for 100 years got knocked down to 8%. It was just like this really chaotic time, and everyone was like into politics, discussing politics. And yeah, the first thing I got into was like kind of Irish republicanism, like Sinn Féin. Like we have a leftist party here that's associated with Irish nationalism, but I mean they're kind of Irish nationalists in name only. Like they've pretty much embraced global homo and all that stuff. But that was just like kind of the natural place to go at first, and they're kind of like I guess they're like a standard sort of like Scandinavian socialism style leftist party. Although in the last few years they've gotten way more on board with all of the sort of cultural leftism stuff, if you want to call it that. So yeah, I was into that, and then you know, like every like young leftist like read Orwell, Homage to Catalonia, and the Chomsky books, and like flirted with like anarchist syndicalism and all that kind of thing. But I don't think I was ever going to stay there for very long.
So you're saying you really got more involved in politics, like once material conditions kind of came crashing into your life in a more significant way?
Yeah. Suddenly, like politics became kind of interesting. It was kind of it was a more sort of open space of possibility. You know, the country like on the brink of collapse. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I don't know. I think I would probably have gotten I think I would probably have become a spurg about politics no matter what, to be honest, when I started studying philosophy. Because when I got more into philosophy and I kind of got bored of politics. Like if you're looking at politics just through the lens of like political parties, you know, it does get pretty...
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a great point, because before the crash and before things opened up, it was very like plain down, you know, just a simple binary. Do you want the blue or the red? And it's pretty much the same shit. Like there wasn't much to think about. It was like it was preset. It was like preordained. It was like, yeah, there wasn't much to it. But now it seems like when things are like falling apart, now it seems like there's all sorts of weird crossover and different tendencies emerging. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more interesting now. But what got you off of that left streak? What was there something in particular that just sort of, was it just a curiosity for a moment, or was it something like turned you off of it?
I think it was a gradual thing. I mean, I was never super into like the more like anarchistic strands of leftism, but I did just kind of start to see a lot of it as kind of unworkable. But then I was a lot more interested in philosophy for a while, and you know, I kind of got this sense that the, you know, leftists I talked to and stuff, that they had very different kind of motivations to me, and that, you know, that they had this very sort of materialist, like individualist lens of looking at politics that I just came to see as a bit empty. But I wasn't too focused on politics for a while. And then as I was studying philosophy, I just got interested. I'm always interested in like iconoclastic ideas kind of, and like the most sort of out there thing I found in college was like the counter-enlightenment thinkers like Joseph de Maistre and J.G. Hammond and all these kinds of people that were against the Enlightenment, which really piqued my interest. So I got kind of interested in like reactionary thinkers, like the traditionalist school, Julius Evola, all those types. So I was kind of interested then in like hard right politics from a very kind of abstract intellectual lens. And then that was at the same time as like the Trump phenomenon and like the energy of the alt-right and all the stuff that was going on the internet. So it seemed like a good time then where you could actually find like other communities of people that were interested in that thing. And then, yeah, you know, the way it goes with the internet, you find these communities and one thing leads to another. And, you know, if you're like a spurg about politics today, it's like there's never been a better time to be alive than 2021.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can just spurg out on politics like all day with like-minded spurgs.
Yeah, there's an abundance now. Yeah, but what do you think of like like, do you feel like that energy of like that alt-right at that time in like 2016? Do you feel like do you feel like any disillusionment about it, or
the magic is gone?
Oh yeah, the magic is definitely gone. I mean, like, because I was kind of new to that perspective as well, I think you don't, and a lot of people were, like, so many people that are on that side of things kind of just suddenly, like, woke up to politics in 2015, 16, 17. So it was very new, and I think people probably missed like some of the inconsistencies or the problems that was kind of latent in the thinking around that time. I mean, you can look back at some of it now, and it's like some of it is so cringe. It's like like how quickly the internet advances in like 4 or 5 years is kind of funny. Like you look back and it's like, you know, it was normal to have like Pinochet, God, Emperor Trump memes like 4 or 5 years ago, like all this like really cringe stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was never going to work long term. I mean, the alt-right was like, you know, you had Richard Spencer, whose vision was this like Nietzschean kind of like Jonathan Bowden-esque, like pan-European, like influenced by like the French New Right and like very critical of nationalism and Christianity. And then you had like the majority of people, I'd say, who were kind of disaffected paleocon Christians. And then you had like the streak of like libertarians that had been like on the Ron Paul train for years and just kind of like discovered like race realism with the internet or whatever. So it was a weird kind of coalition that I think was always gonna kind of fall apart in the end. I mean, like the deplatforming as well. I think like a lot of the energy was just how fun that period of time was. But I mean, when everyone is getting like deplatformed and like losing their PayPals and their bank accounts, it's hard to keep that sort of that fun kind of winning energy. It's like, you know, now it actually is serious. You know, this is like really affecting people's lives.
Yep. I like how you just mentioned that, the fun aspect of it, because I was wondering kind of like, I've been thinking on my own just how much does like that energy, especially online, how much just like quote unquote having fun with it really just actually drive particular people's politics and how they present their politics, at least. It seems like a lot of it becomes just trying to be a part of a fun group, or trying to be on the team that's making the funniest memes or whatever at the time to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I underestimate how many people will just go on whatever they sense is the winning side. I mean, like it just kind of baffles me that people can go from like people that were like cheering on Richard Spencer in debates in 2016 are now like Vosh fans. It's like that's just like a
is that a thing?
Well, I mean,
it's according the same type of vapid entertainment, really. So
yeah, it is. I mean, there's what's that guy's name? Hunter Avalon. Like he was like a Nick Fuentes type. I know he's like Vosh's acolyte. Yeah, I mean, people will just like I even see it like within that subculture, like where you see there's like this big new thing of whatever guy is like out there and getting the popular tweets, and you see people that are like mimicking his style and mimicking his talking points, and then like 6 months later it's someone else and they're onto that. I think that there is like a certain kind of person that will just kind of follow whoever they sense is like the alpha or where they're going to get wins from. And I don't know, it's like it's a way of thinking I can't really relate to at all, because like I do kind of like spur out about ideology, but yeah, I mean it's it's a weird thing, but it's definitely something I underestimated that I've seen a lot in the last years. But yeah, when you're winning, like there's always going to be this big cohort of people that are going to be straight on the bandwagon.
And it's interesting how quick that cycle is. Oh, sorry, SLAV, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, no, it's funny. I almost sometimes kind of like in like paranoid moments get slightly worried that will be thought of me with like a big side change, but I guess I don't need to worry about it because I made the change from the overwhelmingly winning side away. So I guess you don't need to worry about being seen as cynical in those conditions really at all.
Right. Right.
But yeah. I mean, how much do you think when we're talking about the alt-right or the dissident right and how it's kind of dispersed now? We had kind of talked about just its nature itself and how that kind of led to that dissipation. How do you balance that with the external factors too of the deplatforming, right? Like which is a bigger factor in your mind? Which would you point to if you were to write the story of all of it? What would you emphasize more?
Yeah, I do think the deplatforming was a big thing. I think I think Charlottesville really took the fun out of it for a lot of people. Because suddenly it was this in real life thing, and suddenly it was like there was the image of like like the costumed neo-Nazis, as some people call them, and like there was this big like mainstream backlash, and it was like, okay, this is actually real now, it's not just memes. But yeah, I mean, I think the deplatforming is still the biggest factor. I mean, like if you just look at, I mean, like James Allsup was on like 500,000 subscribers and he was banned. Red Ice were on like almost 400,000. Nick Fuentes was on 100,000. I mean, I think if it was like a truly open, free platform, I mean, I think Nick Fuentes would probably have a few 100,000 now. The right stuff would probably have similar. That Spencer Sergan debate back in the day had like almost 1 million views before it was taken down. So I definitely think a lot of the momentum is gone due to deplatforming, but also just like aside from the obvious effect of deplatforming, that people aren't finding these figures now, they're not getting suggested through Google searches or YouTube or whatever. But but I mean, even aside from that, just the atmosphere that deplatforming creates, where you're kind of self-censoring your own language.
Yes.
It stopped a lot of the energy that the alt-right had, where it was, like the Daily Stormer used to be popular, but it was, that was just so out there, like, let's just take every kind of cultural taboo and just kind of smash it in people's faces. But like, that thing doesn't really work now if you're going to get instantly banned off Twitter for like, calling a trans person the wrong misgendering a trans person or something. It's hard to really get energy around a movement like that's so built around kind of edginess and breaking taboos. But I mean, there's kind of a positive side to that as well, which is, like I said, a lot of people are just jumping on board these things because they're edgy and because they're taboo, and they're not really going to be interested in any kind of meaningful change. They're
Find
just
a lot
there
of that.
for yeah. I mean, especially in the right, it's like, you know, people that were attracted to Satanism in the 80s and 90s. Now it's like being a Satanist isn't very edgy anymore, you know. But like being a white nationalist is like 10 times worse than being a Satanist. So, you know, that personality type is definitely drawn to those ideas, which is a big problem because there's so many just antisocial weirdos and like very like legitimately like hateful people, like the kind of people that, you know, the media try and like sort of characterize right ideas as being associated with. But I mean, it does genuinely attract that type.
You see a lot of that on the left too, though. Like completely, like so many of those people are just like antisocial, fucking like inhuman monsters.
Yeah,
Oh, for sure.
Well, and that's an interesting thing of like, I think in the last few years, the left like did kind of sift through and recover a little shallow amount of that from the right. And like it's kind of just like a little bit of like a cheap counterfeit. Not that it's ever a super valuable asset in the first place, but yeah, like you see the, you know, you watch a Bausch video, you see some Pepes in the chat and things like that, and what you see, it's teenagers saying based to trans rights now and things like that. They kind of wear the skin suit a little bit, and so yeah, I guess like on the left, you have your TikTok girls talking about getting their 13th abortion and how like awesome that is or something. And
or they're like making up fake mental illnesses, thinking that they have borderline personality disorder and shit like that.
Right. Well, which they do.
Well, yeah. But
Yeah, well, there has to be something constructive because, I mean, we were talking about this before, but just being we've talked about this a couple of times now, but like just transgression for its own sake is meaningless. And a lot of the left, I mean, you know, depending where you are, you're going to think different things of what qualifies as transgression. But for the left, what they think of transgression is, you know, LGBTQ things like, oh, yeah, well, I live in a Christian right country. This is taboo still, you know, even though it's all over corporate America and in the mainstream. But they still view it that way, so they think that's like an edgy thing, you know.
Well, it's funny because it's like a certain front in a greater war, right? And so this is like an aesthetic battle.
That's why I think it's not useful because it's like this isn't. It's got to be constructive. It's like what you guys are saying.
It kind of comes back to basically just our argument about the N-word, like the other day.
Yeah.
It all comes back to the N-word.
yeah, whole things. Yeah, but I feel like, but yeah, I mean, there's been different ways of dealing with that censorship thing because, like, well, we had Logo on, and Logo was saying you just have to be more savvy and nimble in the way you word things to get around it. And we had Genie on, who actually told us to reach out to you, and he just abandoned Twitter and just went to Gab. But I don't know. Do you think there's viability in these alternative like social media sites? Or do you think it's just a matter of time for them?
I mean, there's some viability in them. Like I like Telegram. I like Odyssey, which is like an alternative to YouTube. But you know, a lot of these sites, I mean, I don't have Gab. Like Gab and BitChute are like, you know, you're very conscious when you're on those sites that it's like this has been built like for people that were kicked off YouTube and Twitter. And that's like there's a big ceiling for like where a website like that is going to go, you know. It's just, you know, whatever community is like that the mainstream decides to get rid of, like they're just going to kind of hang out here amongst themselves. And
right,
you know, that doesn't really interest me being in that kind of echo chamber.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think they're very limited because it's just the nature of social media as these kind of open networks that there's going to be one huge market leader in any section of it, you know, whether it's Twitter for the microblogging or YouTube for the videos. And we haven't seen one of those being overturned yet. I don't know, maybe you can count MySpace, but I guess, you know, it was still very early days. But in terms of like these big conglomerates now that control these spaces, we haven't seen one of them been overturned yet. We haven't really seen anything get even close to it. So I do see a lot of co-ops. Like it was funny for a while, like every time a right winger got banned off YouTube, they were like, well, you know, in 2 years, YouTube is just going to be like MySpace. And it's like, well, not really. You know, you're going to be on BitChute with like 5% of your viewers. So, I mean, I think you can try and be savvy. I mean, you mentioned Genie. I think he did actually get banned off Twitter. I've seen people get banned that didn't violate any terms of service. James Alsop, again, like he was quite careful. I remember like his last videos were like about Bitcoin and invest and stuff, but they just, I mean, his name was on a list from the ADL and he got banned. It was that simple. So even, being savvy now, if you're, this seems to apply a lot more in the US from what I've seen, just because of the power that organizations like the SPLC and the ADL have over these private organizations. But yeah, if your politics are problematic for them, they'll find a way to get rid of you. So I think the being savvy will get you so far, but I think what needs to happen more so is like building kind of a resilient audience that will follow you to your own platform or to these alternative platforms. Like Nick Fuentes, I think, did that very well. He got banned off YouTube. A lot of people, that would be the end for them. But I mean, he was streaming on the election night with like 60,000 viewers on DLive, which, it's a Chinese gaming website. That's like all people that he's just brought there because they want to find Nick Fuentes, whatever site he's on. And now he has his own website. So I think that's much more the way things are going to go, is there's going to be these personalities that are kind of personal brands, and they're just going to have to kind of build their brand enough so that when they lose those platforms, they can kind of take their audience around with them. That's a lot easier for Nick because, his audience is so young and tech savvy. But yeah, it's shit. I mean, there's no real optimistic answer to how things are going to go. So the censorship is largely working for them. And the only proper solution would be to nationalize big tech. But I don't think that's going to happen.
That's actually what I was just about to ask, is what, like, it seems so bleak, but like with big tech and stuff, there's really no like putting it back in Pandora's box now that we've got it. So like, what would you see as a viable thing to do there? But really that's the only answer, honestly. And it's it almost seems like it's impossible to chart a path from here to there.
Yeah, I mean, like Trump kind of blew the last chance to do anything about big tech censorship. But I think it is gone now. 4 years of Democrats. I mean, it's people don't even really talk about it seriously anymore now. It is like every time, even when big accounts get banned now, there isn't the same like uproar. It is people just have kind of accepted it now. I mean,
it's normal.
Yeah,
4 years ago, it was crazy when like Milo got banned off Twitter. It was like big news. Like when Daily Stormer was getting censored. It's like, now it's like we'd be surprised if we saw that they were allowed to have accounts anywhere, so
that's a great point. It's definitely been desensitized and normalized. Like election night, like Trump and we were talking about this a little bit before, but like Trump and like all those people posting those irregularities just gone, just in an instant. And I know you can't talk about it on YouTube. We were on like somebody's show and they were like, yeah, you can't talk about this like on YouTube at all. And yeah, it just sort of like that night especially was very surreal because people just were like, yeah, of course, yeah, you're gone, you're banned, like, yeah, it's gonna happen. And it's just like nobody really bats an eye, and it's very that's the more disturbing thing I always find.
It's interesting to me. It seems like Gawker getting shut down and Milo getting banned were like exponentially bigger stories than the fucking sitting president of the United States.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I guess I guess it does make sense because they were the ones that kind of broke the ground on it, right? But I mean, I don't know. I still feel like we haven't given enough attention to the fact that the sitting president was just censored off of the site. I'm sure me pointing this out is it's a waste of time telling you guys because you guys are already aware, but it's fucking insane. I'll always remember to any like normie that still thinks that like the election was completely above board and fine. Like I remember getting off work and I had spent the entire night, watching the live results and shit posting with the boys on Twitter. Right. And I remember like stopping in at a store, talking to people and being like, oh yeah, it looks like Trump just fucking clapped Biden's cheeks. Right. Getting home, talking to my roommate and being like, yeah, it looks like it's over, man. Right. Streaming with you guys, same thing. And then when they stopped the count, it was like the fix is in, it's over, and everybody knew. But I still remember so fucking vividly that entire fucking night up until that point of just unanimous, like you remember like the blue checks just crying, just hysterics in journalist Twitter. Unreal, man.
There was a lot of fear too going. I mean, like we're talking about people getting desensitized to it, but I think there was a general wave of fear because people were were scared to say that it was rigged. And I mean, I don't know what Keith thinks about this. I mean, we don't need to relitigate all this, but like just in general, like the censoring aspect, like I think there definitely was a wave of like of fear and sort of like it was sort of surreal. I think there was that. I think people do feel that, but it's just sort of a thing of like giving up about it already. Just like, what's the point in having, you know, I'm not even going to say I have an issue with this because it's amazing the type of control that has. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, as far as like what you were saying before, Keith, of like the coalition sort of breaking apart and like on the right and all that. Like, yeah, I feel like putting too much stock in Trump or like lionizing Trump was just insane. Like, was just not a good idea. I mean, he was just useful, and I think he served whatever use he could do realistically. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't know. Do you feel like there's still some sort of lingering, like hoping he runs again in 2024 on the dissident right, or do you think that's still there? Or most people have sort of checked out.
Not from any of the people I talked to. I think
that's good.
You know, even the most sort of pro-Trump faction of that, like, which would be America First, Fuentes, I think even they now are like, okay, Trump is pretty much useless at this point. You know, I think the final straw for them, I think, was him kind of, you know, just doing nothing with the, like, throwing the Capitol rioters under the bus and some of the stuff he said since then. But yeah, I mean, I think in some ways Trump was like a disaster for, I mean, a lot of people would say that Trump like created the energy of the alt-right, but I think the more you look at it, like that was already kind of simmering and he just kind of rode a wave. And, you know, it was very detrimental really because, you know, like I was saying earlier, like the alt-right, like prior to Trump was this kind of intellectual thing. It was like Jonathan Bowden and like the European New Right and, you know, this like sort of kind of like an intellectual challenge to liberalism, like a right challenge to capitalism for the 21st century. And with Trump, it became tied up with, you know, reactionary conservative nonsense. And, you know, he took the energy of like, he took the energy that had like been building around like these radical ideas like identitarianism, and he just forever tied them up with the most goofy aspects of conservatism, you know, this like ridiculous culture war nonsense. I mean, you even see it, like you're talking about the deplatforming, but you even see the issue there in terms of like the damage like the establishment right does, and that, you know, people have kind of given up on the issue deplatforming, but it's like, you know, what was the Republican Party, what was like the establishment right offering people in terms of deplatforming? Because all these people endlessly complain about it, you know, all of the big right-wing figures, you know, even like the Tim Pool types, all these types. I mean, what have any of them offered in terms of policy? Because like they're against like the state doing anything major. They're against like nationalizing these companies, and it's like you just end up getting this useless shit. Like we're going to stop enforcing. You know, what's that section that basically gives them immunity from Section 230, I think, that gives them immunity from prosecution, like that they're not held responsible for what people say on their platforms. But, you know, the other part of it is that they're not meant to discriminate against users on the basis of political beliefs, that they're meant to respect free speech. I mean, the conservative response is like, you know, if you don't like stop throwing conservatives off social media, we're going to abolish Section 230. Which would actually be a disaster, because then they'd have to actually be more censorious in what they allow people to publish. And it just would be completely unworkable in a legal sense. So, you know, they had that like period of a few years where they potentially could have done something in terms of like legislative and like the support that was building among the right for reining in these companies. But because they're so averse to using the state to rein in capital, they just couldn't do anything. You know, they complained for a few years, and Trump is out of office now. And he recently said in one of his statements, these statements that he releases as the ex-president, that, you know, he didn't do anything about big tech censorship because Mark Zuckerberg was always saying nice things to him whenever he visited the White House. I mean, it's just
that seems like a win for the good old boys right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I would always like give I was upset about him calling the guard on his own people, the National Guard at the that's obviously like that was obviously bad. But again, yeah, him as sort of a tool, I still sort of give him an out or shoot some bail and like, oh yeah, I mean, what can he really do about, like, you know, the MIC. You know, I mean, you can fire a bunch of generals, but really you're just like, you know, you're putting band-aids on things. What can you do about big tech? I mean, you can do things, but I think your hands are sort of tied. Like there's not much power the president has in the grand scheme of things. But I think that's definitely the right mindset, is that we need to like have more national state control over these entities. I think that's like, I think that's the starting point. I think wherever you're coming from, we got to agree on that. Like,
even if there's nothing he could do about it, you're saying his hands are tied, then like what you'd like to see as like a patron of his or a supporter or whatever, him speaking to you in some way would be him at least speaking to the fact that these things need to be done.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's the whole thing of his interests and mutual interests, is that he wasn't interested in that. He's not like somebody trying to like shake things up. I don't even think he thought he was going to win. Like, he's clearly just trying to ride a wave and get some publicity. And, you know, he's probably in deeper than he thought he'd be. And it's like, I'm not really trying to like go against these people.
No,
like,
I think it's just going to let the neocons run their like economic liberalism anyways, which is like something that I saw. I know Keith was talking about in a video of his about the Nazball vortex. But he said something that was pretty good though, Keith, where you said that the left likes to run on like economic stuff, but then at the end of the day, they just essentially push a socially liberal agenda, and that's really all they push for. And then the right likes to run on like a more conservative, traditional talking piece, but at the end of the day, they just push economic liberalism either way, and that just fetters more social liberalism. And so essentially, both sides are just pushing this fucking liberalism at the end of the day.
It's just how they're just differentiated by how they'll lie to you.
Yeah, exactly. So you were speaking also about how like previously the alt-right was more intellectual project with like right critiques of capitalism and that such. What are some of those critiques that you think are a little bit more in line with what you think should be a conservative project or something you'd be interested in?
Well, I mean, I guess the sort of standard right or traditionalist critique of capitalism is, you know, just the revolutionary transformative effect that economic liberalism has. You know, capitalism, like as a process, capital as a process, doesn't deal with limitations. You know, it has to turn limitations into barriers that can be transcended and overcome. And in terms of what's a barrier to capital accumulation, well, you know, it's the worst kind of population for a capitalist is a kind of healthy population with a strong sense of itself and traditions and so on. So, you know, tradition, family, you know, barriers to accumulation, like, you know, immigration restrictions or sense of a nation, or certain things that are considered taboo, certain kinds of consumerism that's considered taboo, you know, all those things are limitations that have to be destroyed. And so, you know, capital is in this sort of perpetual state of liquefaction and deconstruction and commodification, and that can't survive next to any kind of sense of tradition or folkish identity, or even the maintenance of strong families. You know, I mean, this is kind of a talking point that's made by a lot of people, but, you know, it's not profitable to have a healthy population. You know, it's not going to be profitable to have a population that aren't all consuming porn, obviously, is another example. So, I mean, that's kind of the basic critique of that. But I mean, also, like, capitalism has brought with it everywhere liberalism as its kind of superstructure. I mean, you really see this in Ireland. I mean, Ireland was pretty much one of the most, I mean, it was the most conservative country in Western Europe right into the early 90s. But it also had one of the quickest transformations in terms of modeling its economic system on being an outpost of American multinational corporations. There was a slogan for a political party here in the early 2000s that said they wanted Ireland to be closer to Boston than Berlin in terms of economic policy. And that was kind of the dominant feeling for a while. You know, the economic growth here was so much built on like having low corporate tax and attracting like these pharmaceutical companies and Silicon Valley companies. You know, you have, I think PayPal headquarters are in Dublin, Facebook are headquartered here. The list goes on. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of them. But yeah, I mean, that's brought with it in very quick order. You know, Ireland has become one of the most socially liberal countries in Europe as well. And, you know, I mean, it's just it's a simple historical observation. You know, when you get kind of mercantile democracy, it inevitably turns into an oligarchy of the merchants. And so any kind of traditionalist that's that's looking at devising an economic system. You know, you don't really want a dictatorship of the merchant class. And you know, it's having the revolutionary effects that we're seeing today. I mean, it is going to ultimately lead to the dissolution of nations and the nation state. We're heading into a new kind of feudalism where it is going to be this super class of the Davos elite and the you know, this new money of the Silicon Valley types. And you know, they'll be exploring space while we're living in overpriced rented accommodation from BlackRock. This is, I think this is the ultimate end of capitalism, is that kind of return to feudalism.
No doubt.
The pods and the bugs.
Oh yeah.
In other words. No, for real, honestly. But yeah. But yeah, I mean, what you were saying before about the Nazgul thing. I mean, yeah, I mean that was sort of the thing that stabbed me out of the left was you know, I had more of a material interest, and the social stuff. I started off originally very socially left. I think I am relatively in the grand scheme of things, but I'm more agnostic on that now. And basically talking with leftists, them sort of prioritizing social things at every turn. You know, at some point you have to prioritize. At some point these things come to a head and you have to pick. And they always say we can do both. That's the thing I heard a million times. And basically it took me realizing that they're not really interested in anything material at all, to basically be like, yeah, this entire thing is bankrupt. And I guess on the right leaning side, or like GOP people who like appeal to the right, is just like, you know, oh, they got family values and all this stuff and all these like, you know, appeals, but really their economics are just, like you said, it all just, the gravity just goes back to the same place of just like neoliberal economic order. And it's the same, it all boils down to the same thing. So like, yeah, I think that it's surprising that people still go into those like funnels, like they still buy it, and they, you know, from whichever direction.
Well, that's really all that's allowed, you know. That's like the only that's the scope of acceptable discourse,
right?
And that goes in like to the censorship we were talking about a moment ago,
right. But
yeah, I think everyone knows.
The conservative strategy is to run on these social issues that are extremely divisive, and to win on the basis of that they're going to do something to reverse that, and then they don't have any policies in terms of reversing it. I mean, even with this talk of like critical race theory being taught in schools, I mean, what's the proposal to reverse that exactly? I saw something that they're bringing in a law in I forget which state now, but they're bringing in a law that there's like one specific thing that was published in the New York Times can't be taught in schools, and that's going to be like the solution to CRT. So it's just like the conservative type is just like incapable of looking at things systematically. It's always individual personalities and this culture war shit. But yeah, I mean, the strategy is to run on that stuff and get elected because people are fearful of the left pushing the extremes of that. And then, you know, in terms of like materially what they do, they give tax cuts to the oligarchs that are actually funding that stuff through institutions and pushing that stuff. So it's an unwinnable dialect, you know.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of parallels with the left there of like, oh yeah, ban CRT or like abolish the DOE or whatever. And it really reminds me of like the left approach with like policing and all that. And it's just sort of like, it's sort of like the anarcho, like libertarian, like kind of connection there. It's just, oh, if we just get rid of these things and just go in our homes and homeschool and just withdraw, then everything will be fine. While the rest of the world is like taken over by like these corporations. So yeah,
well, there's a clear cut through there because they're both liberalism at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, that's something that people like that I criticize a lot on, even the distant right as well. Is like the dialect is liberalism. It is a liberal view of the world. You know, people get so worked up about like communism and like Bolshevism and like calling BLM Marxists. It's like, you know, these people aren't like really ideological Marxists. You know, they're like, you know, it's just it gets overly like abstract and like getting into history and stuff. It's like, you know, most of these people aren't really motivated by any specific ideology. It's just this sort of undercurrent of libertarian social order that's kind of an anti-racism that's kind of driving everything. And this sort of religious urge of what people call wokeism.
that's
But
what's so
you
funny.
can get too tied up in like ideology and like Marx influenced this guy and this guy influenced this guy, and that's why like BLM are like rioting in July 2020.
Right.
It's, like, not
Yeah,
really.
right.
That's such a funny neocon response to like, oh, Biden is a communist. He's like Stalin or something, or Kamala or BLM.
Yeah.
It's such a funny. It's basically the mirror of saying Trump's a fascist, and everybody who like LARPs as a fascist or LARPs as a communist is like, we wish, bro. You know, that's the automatic meme response. It's like,
Yeah,
"We wish."
it's like a throwback to like when Michael Savage and Bill O'Reilly and all those guys were insisting that Barack Obama was like an
commie.
ideological Marxist.
Yes,
and communist.
Afro-Leninist.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
So
a throwback.
But they've got to say that it's something else other than what it is, because what it is just what they're promoting as well. And so
Yeah.
they were like, well, this is just liberalism that we're also doing. Well, then what do you have to offer me there? You know, like you have to have Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever the fuck her name is coming out talking about we must stop Biden's socialism, when at the end of the day, like that's not even fucking what's happening here. He's just doing like more extreme neoliberalism. And like when you have these crackpots that come out and say this type of stuff, it just keeps obfuscating it. And then also, like you're talking about, drags in these people that are just there because they heard the buzzword that they're scared of or whatever, and they think that it's cool that they're being dunked on. And it's like, at the end of the day, that's not a serious politic at all. And it's very useful because it just helps to keep things going the exact fucking way they are.
Yeah, it's like there's like leftists see a handful of capitalist oligarchs taking over the government and they call it fascism, and rightists see a handful of capitalist oligarchs taking over the government and they call it communism.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, it's insane.
You're like,
you know,
this
it's
is just
like-
capitalism.
Yeah, but I mean, no one has the language really to do, to criticize liberalism at all. I mean, it's, you look at like the typical sort of MAGA voter, and I do like I think you would find some of them have like instincts of national populism, like like if Trump came out and said like we're going to like nationalize industry and we're going to like throw these billionaires in jail, like they'd probably be all for it.
Yeah.
But they just don't really have the language to like articulate this stuff. They have to fall back on an appeal to the values that kind of permeate the culture. I mean, it's easy to forget, but like remember when Trump in the debates in 2015, like he just came out and he was like the only one of the 7 or 8 guys up there that was like not like in favor of like private healthcare. He's like, no, we're not going to let anyone die in the street under my watch if we're not having money. And he was like coming out in favor of infrastructure programs, all this kind of thing. That like the other candidates were baffled and they were like, you're a socialist, but and even the people in the crowd were like booing Trump for this stuff. But his poll numbers just kept going up. So it's like I do think I think most working class people have like an instinctive appetite
100%.
for that marriage of sort of right social values and left economic values, but it's just never offered to them, and they've never most people go their whole life without ever even seeing anyone articulate that. So maybe it's not surprising on some level that like they always fall back on these like specters of whatever it is, communism or fascism.
Right. They already beat them in the last century. They're already dead and they're just fighting like the specters of them. It's crazy. But like, yeah, if somebody were to come around that's charismatic, that has that sort of like social right leaning,
They'd be killed off.
Well, that's why.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, that's where Trump derangement syndrome came from, because it's like even though he accomplished nothing for 4 years, still in 2020 they were as deranged as ever. Because I mean, just the sight of someone going up there and like just
the enemy of the
speaking out
people.
against the donors, I don't need your money. We're going to stop foreign wars. We're not going to govern for special interests. We're going to like have this sort of nationalist economic outlook, and just the specter of like someone going up and saying that and getting huge popular support and drawing these huge rallies. I mean, that was really enough to really scare these people into showing their hand in the years that followed.
Even the lip service to those ideas is dangerous, because what those ideas do is speak to class instinct. Like that's what you were talking about earlier there, Keith. Like that's what working class people just like instinctually, these are things that make sense to them if they hear them, they're things that benefit them materially. And so when you put them in front of them, if you give them the right like way to understand it, of course they're going to be open to it. Of course they're going to be on board with it, because people at the end of the day, as just twisted up and convoluted as everyone's ideology is, and as like broken and down and decrepit as everyone is, and their ability to think for themselves and critically think. I think people at the end of the day know what's good for them if it's presented directly to them in a way that's just material. And so they can see like directly, yeah, of course I'd like to lock up these sickos that are ruining my fucking life. Like what? Why not? You know,
I've been thinking a lot just about how like just basically all mass media is just class war, and it's just lifestyles of the rich and the famous trying to taste make for lower class common people, and so much work is put into specifically not meeting normal people where they are, but convincing normal people of what they want and what they and how they should feel. And I mean, Jesus Christ, like that's a fucking needle to thread, right? Yep. Like that's a fucking difficult job to make. And so imagine you're doing that, you're dedicating all these fucking resources to this insane project, and then someone comes up and just does the really easy thing, which is just saying shit that people actually want to hear, regardless of if he actually makes good on it or not. Like, holy shit, you got to just blast him with the fire hose, right?
That's why I supported him, because all those neocons came out as like never Trump, and they just joined with the Democrats, and all the lefties were like just joining with the Democrats after all their fake criticism. Like, there were even some right people that were like all on board. There was like a weird big tent of everybody just falling back to the middle. And like that was the whole reason why I supported him. Just symbolic. I knew he was gonna get rigged out, but it was just like,
even if materially he's not gonna do anything, like at the end of the day, you're gonna have people sitting around like we are right now talking about, well, why is it that there was such a support for this guy who everyone knew was obviously a fucking buffoon? And it's because he spoke to these things that everyone wants to hear. And then you start to put it together. Wait a minute. It's because he mentioned this stuff that's like actually just like class analysis to a degree, or class instinct. And
it's white supremacy
stuff that everyone wants to do. Well, yeah, now it is for sure. I was just asking Keith though, kind of what his thoughts were on neo-reactionaryism, with that being kind of a big thing that's popping up right now.
Yeah, that's never really appealed to me. There's a few things with the NRX stuff. I mean, I don't find it very coherent. Like it's this kind of neo-absolutist, like Machiavellian way of looking at politics. But then most of those guys have married it to like Christian social thought, and those things are they're completely incoherent. They're taking this very like Hobbesian, what Strauss would call like modernist way of looking at politics, where it's like the will of all against all, and Curtis Yarvin Moldbug starts himself from very liberal premises. He's kind of looking at like how can we like preserve liberty? How can we? I mean, it's this kind of Hobbesian starting point of like how do we reduce violence and the fear of death? And he comes to the conclusion that you have to do it with like an absolute ruler and with these more what looks like more traditionalist or sort of monarchical institutions. So I just find that this kind of hodgepodge of ideas that are inconsistent and kind of contradictory, where there's like Christianity and Machiavellianism, and then sort of liberal precepts, and some of the positions they come to, I just find I'm not very fond of. One of them was kind of defending it's the guy I like, but he was kind of defending Bezos and Amazon to me the other day.
Of course.
It's like the
Well, Moldbug said that. Moldbug said Elon should be the emperor king. He would be a good fit.
Well, to be fair, that was like an old, like, I don't know if that's still a position held or anything, but it is pretty funny.
I've never held that position. I've never held anything close to that
Well,
position.
I don't even know how sincere it was in the first place, is what I'm saying.
I think it's pretty sincere. I think he was doing another tour recently. Probably funded, I think, by Peter Thiel, and he was saying similar things again. I mean, I know a lot of the NRX guys will say they don't agree with him on that, and they've gone like a more kind of Christian reactionary position. But I think that's even more incoherent in a way. I'm like, why don't you just draw from like Christian social thought? Why don't you?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you're like drawing on this like Machiavellian way of looking at politics that kind of overturned Christian like logocentric way of looking at politics. It's
well, this was funny. Is that's my overlap with them is the Machiavellian view, but where I lose them is the Christian thing. I'm like, wait, what? Wait, how did you? But what do you think is the contradiction though? Because to me, like a monarchy, I think that's meme ideology shit. I really do. But like that doesn't seem that far off from like a god. You know what I mean? Like I don't, or like a like a You know what I mean? Like, I don't see it. What is the contradiction in your mind with that?
Well, I mean, Strauss talks about this a lot, Leo Strauss, but, the idea that there was this fundamental transformation with Machiavelli and Hobbes into modernism where, previously, how society was arranged was based on a kind of overarching conception of logos, and it was it was part of philosophy. It was kind of practical ethics, and if you're a Christian, there's a clear idea of Christian social thought and how these things are to be arranged and so on. And yeah, with Moldbug, the starting point is this sort of liberal atheistic view of things where, again, it's this kind of individualist, contractual approach to the state of trying to sort of maximally preserve people's liberty. So I don't really see how they line up so well. I also just find that, like, I don't know, as a personality type, the NRX types, I mean, they're like I had kind of a debate with the Distributist before, who I think he's probably the best of those guys on my channel, but it came down to we were debating about like if capitalism is the problem, and I just found he was focusing a lot more on like the social effects of capitalism.
Yes.
And he was very reluctant to even use the word capitalism because it's, he doesn't want us to sound like Marxists.
It's a no-no
or whatever.
in NRX.
Yeah. So there's this like instinctive, like, instinctive rejection of like radicalism, which I think is not a good thing if you're going to be this fringe, like dissident political movement, to have like to kind of appeal to fogies that are like scared of sounding too radical. I don't think that's really going to go anywhere. And I also just think that it's a lot of stuff. I mean, I see some of their content, and it's just like, look at what the SJWs are up to now, and it's it's this kind of
sure, yeah.
Even the cathedral thing. It's like there's always this reluctance to pin it down on the capitalist oligarchs, the process of capital.
Exactly.
It's starting with ideology. It's out of the universities, it's out of the newspapers. In a weird way, sometimes
who do
the
those
capitalists.
benefit?
Yeah, in a weird way, sometimes it's like the capitalists are the good guys, and you also find like they're kind of attached to like a lot of them like sort of Austrian economics and. Libertarian ways of looking at the economy. So in a weird way, it's like it's kind of a way to be. I think for some of these people, it's kind of a way to still hold on to their libertarian priors without being the the goofy libertarians that libertarianism has become. But yeah, I think there's a lot of problems with it. I think that I don't think the structural analysis is sound. That this stuff is just entropy, that it's just naturally kind of going in a left-wing direction, that it's a result of ideas. I think it's, I'd probably agree with you guys more. It's much more of a result of material factors. And then there's more problems. I mean, like Moldbug holds up like people like Thatcher and Reagan as people that like push back against the cathedral, and it's like,
God.
To me, those two are like they've probably furthered the interests of the cathedral more than anyone. Yeah,
absolutely.
Really like that.
To me, it's not a functional politic at all. Like it's just like, this is a way that we can just like express our disdain with everything that's happening around us without actually having to address like what's causing the stuff that's happening around us. It's like I can put up some fancy wording and say like, oh yeah, the cathedral and is causing this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, what does that help us with when you don't tie it to who it's benefiting and why it's doing this?
I think it's just like you can say all the usual anti-capitalist critiques, but instead of saying capitalism, you say modernity. And instead of talking about superstructure, you just reverse engineer the whole concept and call it the cathedral. And then you don't need to just use the keywords and shibboleths of the other team that is bad for your audience.
Yeah, and they don't face some of the deplatforming of the rest of this and right, because they don't they won't talk about this might not go down well here, but the Jewish element of the makeup of the oligarchy, the media. I mean, at the end of the day, they say that this stuff is being driven by the media and by the universities, so you'd imagine that if they have that kind of ideology down view of things rather than material conditions, that might be pertinent to look at who owns this stuff. But
that's the thing. They're talking media, academia, the NGO network, and it's like, all right, sure, yes, that's good. Like, that's good that you're thinking about like power
that's
and
one
relations.
piece of the
that's
puzzle.
good. But who do they serve? Like, where's the capital in this? Like,
so to me, they can complain. They can complain a lot about symptoms without having to talk about Zionism or capitalism, and I think that's kind of a useless critique, really. That's kind of like 1 degree above conservatism to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen them talk about like CEOs and capitalists like as like the people in power of that, like they're sort of like pencil neck geeks that really are like, you know, timid, and they're just kind of like they're not really enforcing their will on anyone. They're just sort of like trying to stick to the numbers. Like it's libertarian. It really is. It's like economic.
Well, and that's the point of origin for a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to pick on them too much or anything, but it does just seem like it's a tool for like kind of a specific purpose, but there's just like a kind of a low like upper limit of its usefulness, and it feels like it kind of has been hit already.
Yeah.
I mean, they always say you don't have to agree with all what Moldbug said, but NRX is a useful tool on its own. But I'm not even. I'm being very harsh on them, but I don't think I'll even give them that, to be honest, because I've never needed. I mean, I've never used NRX, and I don't know what I'm missing by not having it. And I've asked them, and I've never really got a good answer to that. It seems to be. I mean, you can get the same critique from like Althusser and Gramsci, but
I'm gonna say
more
this
meat in those critiques.
I'll say this, and this probably isn't the flattering thing that they would enjoy hearing, but my point earlier just about like, hey, capitalism can now be called modernity, and hey, superstructure can now be the cathedral. Maybe just as a transitional kind of phase, it can be useful in that way.
But it's more of a catch than a transition. Like it's more like a holding chamber than a transition. I mean,
it's open. It's like open the tunnel for the spoonful of baby food of giving right wingers like leftist tool sets.
No, I think you're right. I think the whole general trend of parts of the dissident right moving away from the free market, moving away from libertarianism, that is a good overall trend.
Yeah, one good thing that came out of the Moldbug sphere was neo-absolutism. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
No.
Mostly from this guy, Chris Bond, who wrote a book called Nemesis. But he basically just took the aspect of Moldbug that focused on power and like the patron theory of politics, and he focused very much on the work of this French thinker Bertrand de Jouvenel, who Moldbug borrowed a lot from, and so he made the NRX stuff more coherent into neo-absolutism, which is kind of a critique of like liberal ontology and the contractual view of the state, and also very much a focus on what he calls the patron theory of politics, which is this idea that political history is a series of like high-low versus middle battles, that this is how change happens, that the very powerful people, the oligarchs, ally with the masses against the middle institutions to centralize power. So, they'll use mass revolts to weaken sort of subsidiary power centers like the family, trade unions, the church. And he gives kind of a historical analysis on the basis of this, which is actually, it's a very useful way of looking at politics. And he applies this to a lot of things. Like, for example, in his book, I did a video about it before, he looks at like the growth of human rights and how like the Ford Foundation and the Democrat Party basically created human rights in the 1970s as a way to constrain Nixon and Kissinger in their foreign policy. So I find that quite useful. But again, that's kind of itself is kind of a material analysis of power. There's nothing kind of uniquely Moldbugian about that as such.
Yeah, when we were talking with some NRX guys, to me it was just like, oh, none of this sounds very new to me. This is just like some stuff under a different name with a couple of different words instead. That doesn't seem to quite do the entire thing that the other stuff does.
But it always sounds nice coming from a right winger, because it's oh shit, I don't expect you to say this shit. So like,
that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with like the Nosball thing. Like that's like, to me, that's like what Slav was saying. The utility of it is, it's like, it's nice that it is kind of like Trojan horsing these like more material structures or systems for analysis into these like more conservative people who may have been like neocons or whatever, a couple of cycles ago or whatever you want to call it. But
I mean, it's impossible now for a self-conscious, socially conservative right winger to kind of shill for capitalism in the way they could have a few years ago. I mean, it's like when you're like losing your like all your social media And, these oligarchs are like, there's like daily announcements that they're going to like, what was the latest one? PayPal is going to work with the ADL to combat hate and all this stuff. Like when it's just so in your face all the time, and like, the entire media apparatus and, all the billionaires and so on, they're all out against your kind of politics. It's very hard to hold on to the delusion that there's some kind of like base capitalist class or something. I mean, it does eventually it just has to become more kind of combative, and there has to be kind of a sense that there's a class interest involved as well.
Yes, 100%.
That's why I think it's kind of like a little bit of a hopeful thing to see like some of this NRX stuff, because it's like that's almost like an admitting in itself that the binary isn't really working for anybody anymore. And so it's kind of like this new growth of like of some school of thought that's trying to marry these two ideas, even though maybe it's not doing it in the way that I like it. It's kind of marrying like more socially conservative ideas. Well,
again, to go back to Deplatforming, I don't think they'd have a fraction of their popularity if the more sort of third position or like sort of social nationalist types were platformed that are just openly anti-capitalist, people that think more like me. I think if those people were allowed a voice more, I don't think that NRX would have become so big in the last 2 or 3 years because they rose just as those people were getting heavily deplatformed.
Yep.
They're the more
and how much of that
version.
And how much of that do you think also comes down to the fact that, because this is something we talked to Jeannie about, they also are just really big on just advocating inaction. And I'm not personally super big on like, prescribing solutions, honestly, because I don't fucking know. But it almost seems like one of the top priorities of this wing of dissident politics is basically to just tell everybody to just, I guess, like start a family and just completely key out. I mean, I guess if your highest aspiration is getting your Fox News mom to stop caring about pointing out hypocrisy, then like, I guess you'll accomplish all your goals and more. But that is, like I said, kind of a low ceiling. But it seems like it makes it a lot safer, right? Because like, oh my gosh, like these dangerous extremists are telling people to log off and touch grass. Holy shit.
Yeah. It seems like everybody's having a reconciling moment of like being a former neolib or neocon when times were good, and basically realizing the shit is falling apart. There's too many contradictions, and the left code is like to turn into like a radlib type person and purple hair or whatever. And I guess if you're, or a neocon, like this is very appealing. This is some way of like getting to be somewhat dissident, but not really, you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like on the edges. Like, what's the source? That's the thing, is always like, what's the source? Like, where's the top of the pyramid? And it's always just evil, like general evil, like mystical evil. And I'm like, all right, man, I can't do anything with this. Like, I don't know what to do with that. But yeah, I think
it's for some of the NRX people, it's Protestantism or like
yes,
Calvinism.
Yeah, the lack of formalism in it.
Right. It's there's a boot on my neck, but as long as we can get people to see the boot, that's okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
if
you're saying that like these ideas are coming out of the university, if the cathedral is the university system and the media, and like 7 of the 8 Ivy League university presidents in the US are Jewish, and you're going to tell me that this is because of Calvinism, I'm gonna question like maybe you have like other reasons for not wanting to come to another conclusion about that,
I did actually. It's funny. I watched your video recently on the city of London, right? And like I really was just like kind of ignorant of a lot of that stuff, and it did occur to me that I really just wouldn't see something like this from these more kind of like, I don't know, I'm going to use it flippantly, but like idealistic thinkers of just like it's practical, is a practical approach. As opposed to, I guess Protestantism, I guess something about Lovecraftian metaphors. I don't know. Now I feel bad, like I'm being too hard on them, but it's a lack of practicality. Anyways.
Yeah. And the boot on the neck thing, we've talked about it before, but like, but yeah.
Well, and I think there's truth to it, but
yeah, I think that's why there's like you could make a connection to like Molbug thinking and like supporting China, which we know.
Well, exactly.
And like, whatever. We should let's switch gears to something else. Like I think before we run out of time, I want to talk about the
I mean, the
altruism thing.
offshoring thing does get to what we're talking about, though, because, I mean, like, I can't remember what year it was, but they released the Panama Papers where they showed the extent of the offshoring, and it's hard to get a gauge on it, but I mean, anything from, like, the estimates go from 10% to 50% of the world's wealth is offshored, completely untaxed, you know, in the handful, like, relative to world population of a handful of people, it's in the hands of. And yeah, I mean, when you look at the scale of that, and then you think of like the nonsense that gets discussed on a daily basis, the nonsense, whatever the latest culture war is, whether it's masks or you know, whatever else,
Trans athletics.
and like this isn't something that even gets discussed politically.
Yes.
You know, the Panama Papers came out, they were forgotten about it, and it's like, you know, we have like potentially half the world's wealth is sitting there untaxed, and the oligarchs are just slowly like dissolving the nation state, and pretty soon we're not even going to have the means where we could potentially rein this in, and no one's really paying attention to it.
No,
so I mean that's
the thing. Yeah, it always frustrates the shit out of me of like, yeah, like why are we talking about trans shit all day, every single day, 24/7, and they're not even like a big part of the population, and yet all this like tectonic shifts are happening beneath us around the world. Like it just boggles my mind. It's not proportional.
Well, I mean, in a way, that tells you the reason. I mean, the oligarchs fund this stuff because it's a you know it's a nice distraction to put the left onto. I mean, the wokeism stuff really took off around, I guess, the mid 2000s and around the time of Occupy Wall Street and that. And I mean, where has economic populism gone since then? I think it's only gone backwards.
Yep. There's that meme of like the big fat guy on Wall Street with all the signs outside his window that are like Occupy Wall Street and tax to 99%, and he's like, quick, introduce them to trans and like identity politics, like that type of thing.